Hi, this is Ken Jarecke, and today we're talking pictures with Paul Bellinger. Usually I'm the one asking the questions. Today, the tables are reversed, and Paul will be asking me questions. He'll be asking me who knows what about recent podcasts. It's just kind of a review that allows Paul to kind of act as the viewer and hopefully will answer some questions that you have as well. Hey, Paul.
Hey, how's it going, Ken?
Going well.
So you've been busy since the last time I talked to you.
Yeah.
I think you've done about 5 or 6 podcasts since we've got on the podcast together.
Starting to get the hang of it. Starting to get a little more comfortable.
So what else has been going on? What else? What have you been up to lately? What have you been shooting? What have you been doing?
Lately, we've just we've gone through probably the third budget revision of this documentary film I'm going to be shooting. So we're just getting that nailed down, and then there's another short film we're doing. We're going to shoot that pretty quick here. Just kind of an art installation thing. And as far as still photography goes, I don't think I've been doing much of that, but just this and that. Nothing earth shattering.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, we saw each other a few weeks ago, or maybe I guess it's been about a month ago now at the Montana International Film Festival. We both shot up a storm at that. How did that go for you?
Oh, that went well. I mean, we shot a bunch of we could show those pictures if you want. I don't know if they're still on my laptop. That was probably the last thing I've shot, that kind of stuff.
Nice. Yeah. So, couple of things before we get into some of these other podcasts. Some things that you haven't touched on the podcast that are kind of like big news type things. You've mentioned them briefly. A couple of photographers that we both admire a lot passed away in the last, I don't know, month or 2 months now. And I just wanted to ask you briefly about each of them, starting in chronological order with the one who died first, and that would be Peter Lindbergh.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Peter's work. I never met him. I didn't know him. I liked his natural approach to I guess fashion photography is what you'd call it. But he was the master of kind of photographing people as not only fashion style type of figures, but kind of more of their real personality or their real look as well. So he was minimal on makeup. He'd shoot in black and white most of the time, and he'd use a green filter, basically process his images like Joseph Karsh would do for if you think of what the great portraitists of the 50s and 60s used to do. They used to use a green filter on men, and that was like the Ernest Hemingway look. So if you think of Yusuf Karsh's portrait of Ernest Hemingway, you're thinking of that green filter. And it was kind of at the time, during that time, and even into the early 80s, it was just a trick that portrait photographers would use only on men, and they wouldn't use it on women for whatever reason. It was, didn't make their skin look good or something. Well, Peter would use that on women all the time, and it's really just a wonderful earthy look that is good for both men and women.
Yeah, can you think of any images? I mean, so I got it right here with me, this book by Peter Lindbergh. You and I were at a small bookstore in Bozeman, Montana, and used bookstore has all kinds of awesome photography books and things like that. I think it was one of the first times that I had been there and that you and I had gone to a bookstore together. And when we saw this book on the shelf, you're like, that's the one you got to buy. If you're going to buy a book today, that's the one you got to buy. So I don't know, how did Peter Peter Lindbergh influence you? Are there any images of his that you find like especially inspirational, or any shoots of his that really kind of, you know, motivated you in any way?
I don't know if I don't know if he originated this, but he was kind of the guy who would do the narrative fashion shoot. And so you'd have this whole story happening where it's, you know, uh, the aliens landing in the desert, and the woman living in the trailer discovers the aliens, and they, you know, become friends, whatever. Just these weird little narrative stories that you could use as a vehicle to make.
So like this picture.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's so if you're shooting news photography, you're always talking about, well, what's the peg? What do I hang this story on? What's the excuse to do it? And so with fashion photography, that's it's the same type of deal. You create a narrative, and a lot of times you'll see people, especially on YouTube, they'll shoot these fashion photos, and they're talking about the light, they're talking about the mood they're trying to establish, they're talking about the clothes, they're talking about the model, but there's nothing to hang any of that on. There's no end, there's no goal. And so when you have that narrative, it's like, well, this is why we're going to choose this dress, and this is why we're going to do the makeup like this, and this is why we're going to choose this location. So that narrative becomes the anchor for the whole editorial piece.
Yeah, I mean, would you say he was kind of something of a cinematic fashion photographer? That he probably had a lot of influence from film and 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 this whole idea of telling a story, like this concept of the fashion story, not just, you know, here's a girl in a dress on a blue background, but like actually having this whole elaborate story, like you said, that motivates every aspect of the shoot, from what they're wearing to the set to the hair and makeup, etc.
Yeah, I don't know. There's very few. You know, you think of, you know, Irving Penn or Avedon or Scavullo. These type of guys worked in a studio, and it was about the light, it was about the moment, it was about bringing something out of the subject. And you know, they'd shoot fashion, they'd shoot whatever, but to me that was always kind of very limiting. You know, and I guess, you know, Avedon got out of the studio now and then, but
But he brought his white paper with him. I mean,
yeah, yeah. Well, it's just I just don't know how you can I don't know how you can approach that stuff without having some kind of fun story that you're going to pursue. To me, that's it's storytelling, it's a narrative, it's fun. Um, I guess if I was really into clothes, I would like the evenly lit or beautifully lit portrait on the clean background, but I'm not into clothes. So
do you think Peter Lindbergh was into clothes?
I think he was into photography. I think he was into making an image. And I think that in the bottom line, all these photographers, whether I'm assuming we're going to talk about Robert Frank next, you know,
Yeah.
every Peter Lindbergh, Robert Frank, the great photographers, at the end of the day, it's all about the image. It's not about who you're shooting for. You don't care, you know, that if you have Time or Vogue behind your name, that's just meaningless. It's not about, oh, look at me, I got the front page of the New York Times this week. That means nothing to these guys. The only thing that matters is the image, this the what they're trying to what they're trying to say themselves. That's what matters.
Yeah, I think I might have read a quote. I mean, I'm terrible with quoting people, so I'll go out on a really thin limb here. But I think he was quoted as saying something like, you know, he mostly just cared about women, and he really just loved photographing women, and that was his most important thing, and that he didn't really care that much about anything else. I think he obviously cared about light a lot as well. What do you think?
Well, you know, he was his light. It was pretty bold sometimes. Sometimes it was kind of. it wasn't a separate character. It was just kind of there. But sometimes he's really kind of aggressive with his light, kind of like he was aggressive with his black and white and the green filter. So he pushes it to a degree that it might not be technically correct. It might not be, the shadows might not be falling exactly how they'll tell you to do it in photography class. And he knew how to push those limits and still capture this beauty and make it work. Does that answer? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, and also, I mean, I guess I read some quotes from models that had worked with him and stuff, and they said, he didn't retouch the images; that they were just very natural. Like you said, the light was just kind of like he would modify it, but it was kind of like what's there. The images often were blurry. There's motion; they seem real. I think that was kind of the main thing about Peter Lindbergh, is that his fashion images, just they seem like real pictures, not necessarily set up, not necessarily lit or styled in any particular way. I mean, some of them, the famous ones with the supermodels, were obviously styled and whatnot, but I think a lot of the work that you saw in the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years was, just seemed like very candid, very real, very authentic.
Well, that's the thing. Whether you're working with just normal people, photographing normal people that you've just met, or a model that's been photographed every day for the last 10 years and is completely, it's just, her day job. That connection you have to the person in front of the camera comes through. So if you're thinking about, I use the Scavullo example earlier. So he shot all the Cosmopolitan covers for probably 20 years, whatever, and they were all highly stylized, and they all had a certain paper color background, and they were lit the same way. And the model's hair, the big hair, and that's kind of the swan swimming on the surface, behind you, inside and behind that model. I guarantee you there's gaffer's tape, there's clips, there's whatever string, scotch tape, whatever it takes to make that illusion, to create that illusion, the Scavullo Cosmopolitan cover portrait. So Peter was like the exact opposite of that, and that's the beauty of it. And so in the first example, the Cosmo example, the model is an object, just like the clothes and the hair. Everything it's just objects pointing, to a certain goal, which was the Cosmo look of the cover. With Peter, it was about the person in front of the camera, and the clothes might have taken a back seat. So, that's you can talk about that, but is it better to show the clothes in a natural, more like holistic type of situation, or is it? So that's a different debate. But at the end of the day, that's two different ways of just approaching your subject, and the difference between a clothes horse and a real person in front of your camera. And so
Yeah.
so then you have to ask the question is, if a 20-year-old kid went into the offices of Vogue today and they're shooting like Peter Lindbergh, do they get any traction? Do they make any headway, or can only Peter shoot like that? That's something to think about. Um,
Yeah.
do you have to be Dave Chappelle and have that reputation before you can say something outrageous and nobody, they don't grab the pitchforks? Do you have to be Peter Lindbergh before you can put a maybe unflattering light on a person's face and still be considered good. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that we've mentioned a lot of times, like when we talk to each other, we'll say, "Yeah, I'm doing street photography. I'm out here right now, and I've got Lindbergh light." What does that mean?
It means the light is you found some light that works is all it means really. And I think that's all, I don't know. I didn't know the guy. I don't
Yeah.
know if he had very clear ideas of what he was trying to create on set. When you look at wider shots of his setup, there's scrims involved, uh, they are crafting that light. But I think he was happy working around the edges of that crafted light that they created. So that's why you see, the frames and the backdrops, and you see these edges coming along, because there was something about that light that might not have been exactly what he was going for, or what the shoot the the uh the crew was going for, but it worked.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's kind of like Overcast, is kind of like Lindbergh light. Like when I think about a lot
Oh
of his
yeah.
pictures, it's kind of like, he's shooting in the canyons of New York City, so it's kind of always going to be sort of in the shade a little bit. Um, like he's kind of using a little bit of a slow shutter a lot of times, so like, for instance, one of my favorite series is that Walking with Lindbergh series, where he just like takes a model and just walks around in New York, and it always seems like that's always like on a gray day, or maybe it's just because there's so much shade from the buildings. And then the same kind of with those beach, we like to set up on the beach a lot, and with his black backdrops and stuff, and it always seemed like he had nice exposure on the sky, like cloudy, not super direct sunlight or anything like that.
No, it was, I mean, ideally it was overcast with that highlight coming in. So you still have that
Yeah.
little bit of directional light. It might be just hitting the hair or a cheekbone or something. But when it's on, with the overcast, even beautiful light with that little bit of highlight happening, that would, that's when I would use that term as a
Yeah.
shortcut to actually saying what the light is. Just Lindbergh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got that kind of light happening right now. So it was fitting. The sun occasionally will just kind of peek through the clouds, and you get that tiny little bit of highlight, but overall it's just soft and kind of overcast. That's perfect. So, okay. Yeah. It was a huge inspiration for me to get this book. And for you to show Peter Lindbergh to me. I had no idea who he was before I met you. And to see him as a fashion photographer that really just was very real with the pictures, and kind of the opposite of what you would think of when you think of fashion photography. It was a huge inspiration for me. We did a shoot together where we did Alien Girl that was like sort of pseudo inspired by that picture I showed earlier from Peter Lindbergh, only we did it all in color. So he's definitely someone that we've talked about quite a few times over the years.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to fashion photography, you got Peter and you got Arthur Elgort, and I think Arthur is probably more of that than even Peter. Arthur is just everything's fair game, on the set, off the set, before, after. You know,
Also, mentioning Arthur Elgort, I mean, you kind of just hit on, like, we've both read the books about the fashion industry photographers and how they're often like pretty bad people, very, like basically sexual assaulters and things like this. And here we have two that lasted and are, in the case of Arthur Elgort, still going, still shooting things, and that are not like that at all. So, I mean, I think that's another important thing to mention, that from everything I've seen on Peter Lindbergh, every model that's worked with him, every fashion editor, they just love him to death. He must just be one of the nicest guys.
well, you don't have to read anything to see that. I mean, you see it in the images. You see how people are interacting with the camera when he's behind it. So you don't have to. I mean, it's like uh, photographers reveal themselves. It's there's no getting around it. You see exactly their personality when you care to really look at their images. There's no hiding who that person is.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we talked about Peter Lindbergh a lot. Let's talk about Robert Frank. Uh, Another person who I had no idea who it was until I met you. You showed me The Americans. I didn't get it at first. It took me a long time to come around to that, actually, over a period of 4 years that I was hanging out with you and everything. The first time you showed it to me, I probably thought, wow, like, what is this? Like, how is this a good book? Why is this an important book? And then now it's kind of weird. I think I like it better than you do. So
Yeah, I
I,
mean, Frank's a bit of a tough one, because I might like his earlier work before The Americans better, and maybe The Americans strike too close to home. I don't know what, I mean, there's a lot of psychology there. There's a lot of, when you're looking at images, you're not just pulling from the photographer's vision, you're pulling from your own history, you're pulling from your own prejudices or life experiences. And so, that's the great thing about great photography is everybody brings their own interpretation to it, their own life experiences to it. And so when you're looking at a Robert Frank or even a Lindbergh for that matter, when you've gotten away from the absolute commercial aspect of it, where you have an art director and you have a brief and you have everybody working towards a preconceived idea. As soon as you get out of that type of photography and you get into the photography of personal photography of a great photographer, then all this magic can happen, and then the different interpretations can be brought to the table from everybody that sees it. So with Frank, it's like the perfect, there's always three people involved in every image. It's the photographer, it's the subject, and it's the viewer. And the most powerful of those, that trifecta there, is the photographer. The second most powerful is the viewer. The least powerful, ironically, is the subject. So the subject is kind of like, I mean, I always talk about photography images is it's a Rorschach test. And so if I sit down with somebody and I start paging through The Americans with them, it's telling me more about them than maybe Frank or this the American people or country at that, in the 50s. It's it's kind of
yeah.
it's a fun game. It just you got to really be engaged. Be engaged. You can't just.
So So what does it say about you that you are not a huge fan of The Americans? I mean, you like it. You have multiple copies of it. You recognize its greatness and its, place in the canon of photography. But you just said that it says a lot about you, your reaction, like my reaction when I first saw it was just like, I don't get it. I don't These seem like, snapshots or whatever. Probably said a lot about how ignorant I was about photography. But in your case, you're obviously not ignorant about photography. You appreciate The Americans, but uh, you like other books better, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal view on The Americans is similar to my view on um, uh, Avedon's
The American
Americans.
West.
Yeah.
The American West, yeah.
So I think that as a photographer, we can, and so as a journalist, mainly working as a journalist, when someone is I try to err on the side of just benefit of the doubt, for lack of a better term. So, um, say, one of my favorite Robert Frank images is the elevator operator. I think it's in Miami. I don't remember exactly, Miami or San Francisco. I don't remember, but it's a beautiful image, and it's kind of um, melancholy, and it's like the 16-year-old young woman working the elevator, and she's kind of blasé, and she's kind of just you know trudging through life, as riding the elevator up and down, but not really going anywhere. Okay, so
So we're talking about this picture right here,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah, and it's pretty funny that you would mention it, because I bring this book in, and I'm teaching lessons to Hank and stuff, and for the first time, I actually read the introduction by Jack Kerouac, and he mentions in the intro of this, tell I hope you have that girl's number, or something like I want to get that girl's number. It's like such an amazing look on her face, and it's interesting that you mentioned that picture too, because I think when I first had flipped through that book several times, and I probably looked at that book 100 times now, didn't that picture didn't necessarily stand out to me as much.
Well, I mean, there's a lot more. I mean, the people, you see the woman, she's got a fur coat on, the other, followed
Yeah,
by, we're creating our own narrative. We don't really know, but so you're thinking, they're going to a party, or they're going out to dinner, and they're, wealthy, and she's the person working for whatever it was back then, minimum wage or less, just pushing the buttons on the elevator, and she's delivering them to their fabulous uh, destination, and she's, like I said before, not going anywhere. She's going up and down. And so that's what we all bring. It's a beautiful image, and I'd love to have, if I had an extra 60 or $75,000, I'd love to have that print. um,
yeah,
but and then you look at the contact sheets, and then that's always where the little secrets come out, and you can see that Frank was actually, it wasn't actually just a captured moment. It wasn't like a street scene. It was, they were interacting, and sometimes she's smiling, sometimes she's laughing, whatever. There was an interaction happening there. So he was, engaged with this person, but that's, as the photographer, as the editor, as every, that's the image we choose to show. And so, is it fair? Is it fair? Does it actually represent her existence, or am I using her as, have I actually objectified her and used her as a prop to say something that I wanted to say that might not be true to her exactly? So
mm,
that's from a journalistic standpoint, where I like to caution on the side of, like, just benefit of the doubt.
yeah. And I would say, I mean, as a PFJ, especially, I mean, you're very strict on being objective, and not really to having a slant on trying to portray America as this or as that, but being out there and just seeing what it is, and then using your own vision. I'm not saying that Frank was necessarily slanted, but it seems to be that from a photojournalist perspective, there's more of an emphasis on objectivity.
No, so that's a different, that's a whole different subject, because I don't want an objective photojournalist. I don't want, like, I don't want to send a photojournalist into a hospital for kids with cancer, and have them be objective. I don't want to hear cancer's side of the story. I
Yeah.
don't want to. I don't want to. And I always say, if you want to be objective as a journalist, we've got security cameras. Pull your footage from that. Objective is
Gotcha.
not the key. Being fair is the key. Realizing that as a photojournalist, you do have life experiences that you pull from, and that they define your vision. not only your eye, but what you choose to see, what you choose to show, what you choose to consider important. All that are subjective choices as a photojournalist. You're not there as a robot camera. You're not there just moving the camera around and pointing it. You're there to capture something that will make other people stop and say, "Huh, what's going on here?" That's your first job. So it's completely subjective, but it has to be fair. Has to be fair. It
Gotcha.
has to be honest as you possibly can be, while at the same time always admitting that, yeah, I'm subjective. I grew up like this. I grew up in the Midwest. Um, whatever it is that,
Totally. So, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I don't want to stir up a hornet's nest with Robert Frank fans out there, because there are tons of them. There's no question that he changed the direction of photography and that he's extremely important. But would you say that you don't think he was that fair? Same thing with Avedon's in the American West. I know you. I know you have a little harsher opinion on that probably than the Americans.
Well, I don't have a harsh opinion on the Americans. I do have a harsh opinion on the American West. Um, I don't. So the American West, you've got the New York City fashion photographer with a budget who's going to come out to the American West with, a scout that basically find the weirdest people that they can and photograph them, not in the most necessarily flattering way. And so for me, that's it's like these people are not your objects to play with, Richard. So I know, you're a great photographer and everything, but your greatest work was when you were using that that eye of yours to photograph the family, which is the rich and powerful that are never scrutinized in that way. When you use um, that same talent, or that same, surgeon's scalpel of a point of view to photograph the powerless and the people living on the fringes, it doesn't have that same. Um, it seems like you're picking on people at that point.
Yeah, that you're trying to sort of make people look bad,
It's
which
like look, it's like a freak show at that point, and
mhm.
that's troubling. You and so and the thing is, as a photographer, you have this power because a lot of these people have never had anybody pay attention to them before. Some guy is like, whatever, working in a packing house. He's Richard Avedon. I don't know who he is, but he must be important because he flew here from New York City. Yeah, I'll do whatever he says. I'll stand here and you know, it's just the balance of power is even more skewed into the photographer's direction and away from the subject's direction in that instant. And then you're going directly into the art museum. So now it's like the photographer and the viewer are both teaming up on, you know, the
Because
fringes.
who's in the art museum? Who's going to the art museum and looking at the prints?
The guy working at the packing house isn't. That's all we know.
It, exactly, right? Like, so it's a different class of people that are going to be looking at it. So, like you said, it's kind of like ganging up the viewer and the photographer ganging up on the subject.
And I'm not and I'm
But
not saying I'm not saying Frank did that. I'm just uh I don't have any huge problems with Frank. I mean, it just uh I'm glad I wasn't, uh I, I wasn't overly influenced by him. And I'm uh I might see echoes of that now and then in some of my work, but I wouldn't say he's not a Gil Perez for me. He's not a David Burnett for me. He's not even people I don't like. He's not like a Harry Benson for me. Harry Benson I don't like, but he was a huge influence on my work. So, and I don't think I could say the same for Frank.
Gotcha. Yeah. Just to talk about the Avedon thing for just another second. I mean, it's kind of interesting your perspective. And you're a punk, and you're kind of a fight the power kind of guy, and you're definitely against the man and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting that you would say, that you kind of appreciate when he turns his microscope onto the family, the rich and powerful, but not on the people on the fringes in the American West. And I'm just to push back a little bit. I mean, it seems like in a way he was kind of fair. I mean, he treated everyone the same that stepped in front of his camera. He wasn't really nice to anyone. He's kind of one of these guys that likes to, those people that take bugs and they pin them down on a piece of paper and then they, inspect them. It's like he did that with everyone. Would you say, I don't know, we give him a little bit of credit for being fair in that sense?
The difference is that if you're photographing Henry Kissinger has a PR firm under contract. Everybody in that, and Henry Kissinger can have a cocktail with the publisher of the magazine you're shooting that for. Henry Kissinger has options. He has real power, and everybody in that book had real power, and some of them are still. Well, I guess they're on to the next generation of those families of that family, the second.
Yeah.
So they have power, they have means, and it's almost so it's almost like another feather in their cap to be photographed by Richard Avedon, even if they don't look good, but they're in this piece called The Family, and it's about the most powerful people in the United States. So I can imagine once word got out that this was happening, I imagine there was all sorts of pressure coming from sources telling, oh, you got to photograph so-and-so, you got to photograph this one, coming from the PR firms or the power structure of those people. It was almost like an insult at that point if you're not in that collection of images.
Yeah, because it means that you weren't that important of a person, that powerful. It's so interesting how these things can be so twisted around in photography that, on the one hand, he's kind of known for not making people necessarily look their best. And then on the other hand, for the rich and powerful, or for these powerful political operators, that it's almost like a sign of their strength that they can go in front of this guy's camera and just take whatever he throws at them, and if he makes them look bad, then so be it, doesn't matter, no sweat off their back. But if it goes out to the American West and the people on the fringes, that it's they've been manipulated, and so it's just a very interesting, I mean, I think if nothing else, I mean, it gives you this conflict to sort of talk about, and you can see that through his sort of unflinching sort of approach of photographing people. It created all these controversies. I mean, he did treat everyone the same. He photographed the factory the same way as the family, the same way as the American West.
Well, I'll give you two like fairly more modern day examples. When Ann Coulter was on the cover of Time magazine, Marianne Golan was the director of photography, and she hired Platon, however we say that. And he photographed Ann Coulter in the same way he photographed, say, Bill Clinton or a dozen other people. He got in there with the wide angle lens, he got low, and he accented, her long limbs. I guess she's tall. I don't know if I've ever seen her, but she's, tall, kind of, long limbed gal.
Yeah.
And so as soon as that cover came out, you know, Anne is like going after Marianne Golan because she made her look bad on the cover of Time magazine, and it's on purpose and all this kind of stuff. Ann Coulter's on the cover of Time magazine. That's the takeaway. Then she tries to up the game by saying, oh, look, and now they tried to make me look bad and blah, blah. It's just about me. And the focal point is me. And the same way with Sean Hannity when he was on the cover of the New York Times magazine. And I've heard him, you know, he's talking, oh, they must have shot 5,000 images and this is the one they picked. Well, Sean, you knew exactly what you were doing. You invited the photographer, you showed up at the studio, you sat there for 3 or 4 hours. You're a busy guy. You're on the New York cover of the New York Times magazine. And then it's just a game at that point. They're trying to times the factor of celebrity or power by 2 or 3 by complaining about it. So
Yeah.
it's just
Interesting. I would say if you think about the people in the family, they might have been able to complain behind closed doors or whatever, but I think they probably wore it more like a badge of honor that they, you know, got photographed by Avedon, and they could be made, you know, they could be made to not look their best, and no big deal, let it roll right off. But then you see like a modern day celebrity, it's like, I can get more traction out of this by complaining about it.
yeah,
And
it's
by
about
kind
the
of whining
traction.
about how you made me look, you know, I get a whole nother news cycle out of it.
Right. I mean, if I remember correctly, I mean, Avedon lived in the same neighborhood as Kissinger. I mean, you can't tell me that these guys didn't like run into each other now and then at a restaurant in the neighborhood. Sometimes, you know, it's like, hey,
Yeah, yeah.
how you doing? Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so let's get into some of these podcasts. We got a ton of different ones kind of to just review and go over. I'm not going to go into every single one with detailed questions, but I do want to draw the viewer's attention to some things throughout these podcasts, and to just kind of refresh, because you have gone through them and you drop them real fast on YouTube. I mean, dropping them like 2 a week. So for people who haven't caught up yet, we'll give them a little
Yeah, I'm like
taste of what's
Beyonce in that way. I'll just drop this stuff. You don't know when it's coming.
exactly. The Beyonce of photography podcasting on YouTube. So real quick, just kind of fit, because it fits in with this sort of like retrospective of famous photographers who've passed away. Your interview with Tina Loit, I believe, is that how you pronounce her name?
Yes.
She did the book on Bill Cunningham, and a really interesting interview with her. I think everyone needs to go listen to it. I just wanted to get your sort of like last thoughts, latest thoughts on Bill Cunningham, and also what do you think? So 2 things, kind of just like, what are your overall current thoughts on Bill Cunningham? Because I don't want to say last thoughts, because I'm sure you'll think about him again and again. And then also, what does a young photographer take away from looking and just appreciating Bill Cunningham's life and work?
The thing that's important to me about Bill Cunningham, and I don't, can you call him a genius? I mean, you can, but he's more of a craftsman. And you know, he started out life as a hat designer or hat maker. I don't know, there's a word for that. I don't know what it is, but so he was a craftsman. He was creating these pieces that were, you know, really personal, important to him, but he was used to just working away largely by himself on his craft. And so then and you know, flash forward, now he's a photographer, but he's still the camera. The camera was just the easiest tool for him to use, and he wanted to see this. He wanted to observe it, and he wasn't really concerned with light. He wasn't concerned with a moment. He was concerned with the clothes and what people were wearing and what uh, and how they were wearing it. And he just wanted to document that. And so for me, he's just like this craftsman that got up every morning. He put on his craftsman clothes. I mean, he wore the same outfit every day, and he went to work. And his job, I mean, at the crux of his job was observing, and that's what photographers do. And that's what he did. He just observed. Then he captured it, and then he figured out what it meant later and how it all came together. That's my takeaway for him. As far as what that means for anybody else, I mean, I'm sure the New York Times would love to have a new Bill Cunningham today. Who's going to do that? Who's the 25-year-old person that can get up at 9 a.m. and walk the streets, ride a bicycle around, and just observe, and then start to make some type of sense out of the chaos that's the streets of the New York fashion scene. I mean, just street fashion scene. To pull that all together, that's a genius. But it's a genius that only can happen if you put the time in and the effort and the elbow grease into it. That's what he did. I don't know if anybody else can do that. I don't know if anybody else has the institutional knowledge of the fashion industry to say, oh, I saw this 30 years ago at Christian Dior show, and now I'm starting to see that come back on the streets, and this one little aspect, say it could be like a cuff or something on the streets, and or how a necklace is worn. Who can do that? So he's your everyman genius. He brought his lunch pail, literally to work, and went about his business and built it with sweat and hard, and he never took anything from anybody. He never, if he the only reason he became a photographer for the New York Times is for probably health insurance, I think, some form of security. He was happy to do his work, and he did his work for years on kind of a freelance basis. And if somebody tried to tell him what to do, then he wouldn't work for him anymore. He's like, so he's a craftsman, he's an artist, and he's a genius all together. He's a full package. Can anybody replace that? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to be able to replace it. I think a good takeaway though from his life, especially, is like, if you're obsessed with something, I mean, he's going to go down in history as being known, I think, as a great photographer, right? But I don't personally think that his photos are really that great. But it was more just his obsession with clothes, that it's his body of work that's so absolutely impressive, that he just did it for so long. He just dedicated himself to it. And I think that's kind of a thing that people, everyone we talked about it with Peter Lindbergh a little bit too. It's like everyone wants to, do the safe thing or the safe career route or whatever. But there was no career path for Bill Cunningham. He made it himself. I mean, he's the one who pioneered that. And I think same thing with Lindbergh, kind of pioneered that look in fashion photography.
Yeah, I mean, all that's true. I would think Tina would disagree with you as far as the quality of Bill's work, and she's gone through the context. She's put a loop on the negatives, and it's hard with photography. It's hard to make that judgment call, because if I'm looking back at Cunningham's work from the Studio 54 days, so say it's like, let's just say it's 1979. So that's 89, 99, 2000. That's 40 years ago. 40 years ago is the magic number. When you make a good photograph and you give it 40 years to sit around, that good photograph magically becomes a great photograph. And there's no getting around it. So, and it has to do with nostalgia. It has to do with movies. It has to do with memory. It has to do with music. So if I'm looking at, Bianca Jagger in Studio 54, shot by Bill Cunningham 40 years ago, it was just for Bill, it was probably just a picture of the day. It's like, oh, I got a good shot here. Now,
Yeah.
40 years later, it's a great shot. So how
Yeah.
that's the magic of photography, and that's why it increases in value. You know,
Absolutely.
you can look at Ron Galella. You know, the he was like the after probably well, he was like the 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 paparazzi of the 70s in New York City, and a lot of his stuff were, you know, it's just like flash for cash. It was just, you know, long lens. It was whatever it took to get that picture. But when you look at his stuff today, it's like, yikes, there's something going on here. He actually captured something. And so he does, if he does, you know, he did a book on Studio 54, you know, maybe 10 years ago. And is it anything that, you know, can I find like a single frame where I can say, this is absolutely brilliant? Uh, I don't, maybe I haven't looked in the book in a while, but I can look at the book as a whole and say, this captured something.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think with Bill Cunningham, especially, the whole body of his work is absolutely amazing. And it's really something special. But I think, like you said, if you look back at any of those weekly issues when they came out and you see the small printed images in the back, you know, I don't think any one of those pictures are going to be like blown away by, you know. So that's what I meant by, I don't think that he's, in my view, like an amazing photographer, but I think his body of work is really, really impressive. But I do want to see the book. I hope that you'll get it, because she did say in the podcast that he actually was a very good photographer and there are some amazing frames in there, but they were never really edited for that purpose. For that purpose, they were always edited for just, you know, all the black jackets of the season or whatever. They would edit for that, not for showing off his best work as a photographer.
no, and that's the thing. And so Bill's work evolved itself. So when he was shooting, I think was it Paper magazine, and he's shooting, you know, more concentrated fashion shots. It's different than when he was doing on the street. The Studio
Totally.
54 stuff, when he was looking, I think sometimes he was just looking for the big picture because, um, you know, I forget who he had a contract with, but uh, you know, if you're working for somebody like the Village Voice, they're just going to use one big picture. And so now you're shooting for one big picture, and you're concentrating on those things. If you're shooting for the New York Times and you're going to do this photo page with 40 images on it or 25 images on it, that's a different way of shooting. That's
Hmm.
a different way. There'd be a different way of writing as well. So, you know,
Yeah.
people's work evolves and changes. uh,
He,
Kind of brings us full circle. It's like, why do you why do you need a narrative when you're shooting an editorial fashion spread? Because if you don't, then you really don't have any place to go with these images. You don't have any reason to make these images besides showing the dress.
yeah. And then that just becomes boring. I think that's kind of the main reason, is that that would just get boring. I mean, that's a catalog, right? I mean, it's like that's not a fashion story.
And that's the problem. And that's why I say, you know, would a 20-year-old Peter Lindbergh be appreciated by the fashion world today? Because in the fashion world today, not every publication, but a lot of them are so dictated the uh, by the ad buyers, and so
Mhm.
they buy the ads. They're keeping the magazine in print, and then they're going to want their ads echoed or reinforced by the editorial content. So they're sometimes, you know, the same person shooting the ad for Armani or whatever is shooting a fashion spread, editorial spread in that same magazine uh, on the same set where they shot that Armani ad. You know,
with
it's just
Armani clothes.
right. So it's just like it's so commercial at this point. I don't know that there's room for, you know, that type of fashion photography that everybody loves, that actually gets us to buy the fashion magazines. I don't know if there's room for that anymore. Like you said,
Yeah,
they're getting into the catalog phase.
I would say that if you told a fashion editor, they come to you for a job and you said, you can't retouch any of my images and I'm going to pick the ones that go into the magazine, you're not going to get the job anymore, unless, like I said, unless you're Peter Lindbergh. People aren't going to accept those blurry. They're not going to accept the green filter on the celeb's face. Gwyneth Paltrow is not letting anyone else do a green filter on her face. So yeah, I think it would be very difficult, even though and so it goes back to Bill Cunningham too. I mean, these two both were just such pioneers in sort of just forcing their view on the world. I think that is what really kind of makes them great.
Well, see that, and that's the beautiful part. They didn't force their view. They just said, "This is what I see," and other people took the time to see it and appreciate it. And now that takes us to the next step. It's like when you're looking at these same images on Instagram, and you're spending whatever 0.7 seconds on each Instagram post as you flick through and like it, double tap it or not, can you dig into that image? Can you have that same appreciation for that image when you're not really engaging in it, and you're just like, doing the motor actions with your phone, just sliding through?
Hmm. Yeah, it's difficult. Okay, so um, I want to mention quickly about Scott Goldsmith. I've got a Motley print of his hanging on the wall right here in front of me. You guys had a great. This is a great podcast. I don't remember the episode number, but so many great stories. It sounds like you guys were real comrades out in the field together. One of the themes that comes up throughout the podcast, but especially with Scott Goldsmith, was this idea of friendly competition. That he didn't want to. He specifically said he didn't want to shoot the same thing that you were shooting. He wanted to find something better, and the fact that he knew that you were out there in the same, general area as him, that made him better. It made him push harder. And I just wanted you to kind of talk about that a little bit. It's a theme that comes up a lot about that. You guys help each other out. You stay in the same places. You are competitors, but it's a friendly competition, and you appreciate what the other person brings to the competition.
Well, that same theme came up in the Rick Smolin interview just a couple episodes ago. He tells a story about, I think he was shooting for Time, and the Newsweek guy is like telling him, "Oh, that bus is leaving an hour earlier. Make sure you don't miss it."
Exactly.
That's a constant theme out there. I covered, the fall of the Soviet Union, and my closest comrade on that was the guy from Newsweek, and we did everything together. We stayed in the same hotel rooms. We traveled uh, in the same vehicle. We hatched our plans and schemes together. Um, your editors don't want to hear that, but it's the truth of the matter. This is, yeah, it's a competition, and hopefully, I think Scott's right. It does raise everybody's game. If I know Scott's out there, if I know Steve Crowley's out there, if I know Chris Morris or Charles Omni's out there, I'm like, okay, it's like playing, it's
You better bring your A game.
you got to bring your A game, because otherwise you're going to get eaten up.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it really comes through in that interview that you and Scott are pretty good friends, and you can kind of see the camaraderie there, and the stories, and sort of the nostalgic sort of storytelling that goes on in that. I think it's a really great podcast, very easy to listen to. And I'll look forward to hearing more from Scott in the future. I want to hear the story about this Muhammad Ali print that's hanging on my wall right here, how he got to get in Muhammad Ali's face that close while he's getting a facial or whatever it is. Um, you know, um, I think with Scott Goldsmith, one of the things, and with a lot of these photojournalists that you've talked to lately as well, it's like getting in the room is a big part of the battle, and there's an art to it. I think that Bigelow, Todd Bigelow mentioned this phrase that's just been ringing in my head since he said it. It's the art of hanging out, and how important that skill is. And you talked about it with Burnett. I've talked about it with Giroux, and so that comes across a lot in that interview with Scott Goldsmith. We'll harp on that topic more, I'm sure, throughout. But the next one I want to talk about was David Butow. He's over in Hong Kong, and basically, this guy to me currently is kind of like a modern, like he's Batman right now. When I first met him at your house, he had just come from like motorcycling through the mountains in the rain. I mean, and then he's riding his motorcycle out to Washington D.C. and he's covering these important things. And the next thing you know, he's in Hong Kong and he's wearing gas masks, and he's got all the gear and the gadgets and all the little tricks and everything like that. I thought that interview with him was super interesting. It's basically, you go through all of the little details. It's a checklist. I mean, so photographers, this is basically one of your more hands-on, what's in your camera bag type of a podcast episode, where you ask him very practical, detailed things about how to photograph these conflicts. And there's not a whole lot for us to really talk about on that. I just want people to go back and listen to that. And I mean, if you're interested in photographing these things, he's given you all the details that you need, as far as all the gear and how to do it and everything like that.
Let me just
go ahead.
Say that, we did that on purpose, because you don't want people usually, they don't get a chance to hear something like that before they go and photograph their first demonstration or their first riot or something, and they're unprepared. They don't know what to expect. They don't know anything about it. And so we're trying with these talking pictures, we're trying to capture that knowledge that is out there. And if you're not, if you ran into David Butow on a street in Hong Kong as a young photographer, he would tell you all that stuff he shared on the podcast to your face. But that's you might not be lucky enough to meet him in that way, or somebody else.
Yeah.
Like name a dozen other photographers who Carol Guzzi. If you don't run into Carol Guzzi on the streets at a riot, you're not going to have Carol Guzzi's knowledge to help you out. So what we're trying to do with these podcasts, we're trying to capture some of that knowledge and share it, so it's at least out there, so people can pull from it.
Yeah, it was a great one. It covers everything from gear and things that you need to techniques for staying safe, how to embed yourself with one side or the other. Lots of great tips in there. So everyone just needs to go and look at that. And getting to this idea too, it comes up again and again throughout the podcast, that someone told David Butow where to go to get a helmet. Someone told David Butow to bring a gas mask and what brand of gas mask would be the best. Someone told you that. And so a lot of the people that you've been interviewing, they've mentioned, that someone taught them, and they want to be able to pass that information down to the next generation as well.
Yeah. And so now we have, with YouTube, with these videos like this, we have a vehicle to actually do that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're never going to like compare the Nikon, Canon, and Sony zoom lenses. That has nothing to do with photography. I know that's what gets a lot of views here on YouTube, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is what you're going to do with that lens on that camera, when you and how you're going to get someplace, like you said, in the room to actually do it. So it's about the it's not about cameras, it's about the vision.
Absolutely. All right, so getting to the art of hanging out, talking about Bigelow. That phrase, I mean, I just think that's perfect. I think that you're a person that, the way that we met, where I feel like that's one of your greatest skills. I think that myself as a photographer, it's one of the few skills that I'm good at, is getting in the room and hanging out with people and just, not pissing them off to the point where they tell you to leave. Um, Bigelow was mentioning it in the context of, getting sent out by Sports Illustrated to spend a day or a few days with someone, and then just the idea that you can eh, get the person to let you in and show you their real self. And so, what do you have? You have any thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a tough one. I don't. The art of
You can't
hanging
teach
out.
someone, right?
I don't know if you can teach it or not. I mean, I don't know why. Um, and I think I talked about this with Todd. I don't know why people are just like, um, they're just, it's, I don't know why they open up their doors to me. I don't. Um, and I suspect, I always suspect, I never ask, I'm like, you show up to somebody's house, you're shooting for Life or People or US News and World, Time Magazine, whatever it is. And you get there and the people are like, at some point in my career, it was just like the doors were open. I could have went into the guest bedroom and taken a nap. It's just like, I need some sleep. I'll see you guys in half an hour. I don't know why that happened. And I didn't know, I suspected at that point that my photo editors were just like telling these people, just trust this guy and just let him be, and he'll make amazing pictures. I don't know if they were doing that or not. I don't know if it just became like through trial and error. I just did things that naturally open those doors. I don't know what that is,
Yeah,
but
I mean, I think it's, you're good at hanging out with people, conversation, and you get to you get the conversation started, and then one thing leads to another. Next thing you're in their house and they're basically giving you the run of the place.
yeah, I don't know if there's a recipe for that, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I don't think there is. I think it's a social skill thing, and we've seen it. We've come through. We've met a lot of photographers. Some people don't have it. I mean, there's a lot of introverts, and maybe there's a type of photography. Maybe an introvert has a particular type of vision that is unique and has its own value. But I do think that if you're going to be a photojournalist or you're photographing people, like in my case, doing portraits and things like that, you really need to be able to talk to people. You have to be able to communicate, and it will be difficult for an introvert. So I would say for the introverted people out there, you may be able to make that work for you. There may be a particular vision that's unique there that has some good value, but more often than not, I think you're going to have to talk your way into some situations. That's something that you would need to practice, get better at.
So as I'm thinking about this, and I'm sitting here thinking about it, and you're talking about it and everything, I think one aspect of this is that, and I don't know, a lot of this stuff, I don't know what the philosophy is, but I think that the intentions behind the actions completely, I think that plays out in those interactions. So if you have good intentions, I think things work out the way they should. And if you're honest and you're open with people and you have that empathy, it's always about trying to walk in the other person's shoes and trying to let the viewer see what it's like to walk in that person's shoes. And and then, like I said earlier, it comes down to actually making great images that somebody wants to look at, because if they don't look at the images, if you don't engage them, if you don't give them a reason to look, then you can't even get to that next level of walking in another person's shoes. But the thing that I think, and I don't know when this happened, but at some point in my career, I realized that, I get a lot of bylines. I got byline and byline, byline. It's like, oh, you got a one-page image here, you got a double truck here, you get another byline. And those bylines keep coming, and they're like a little trophy. They're like a little, a check mark, accomplishment achieved, whatever, level unlocked. And for photographers, and we get kind of addicted to those bylines, and writers too. And at some point I realized that I'm going to get another byline. This doesn't have to be about me. Nothing in this has to be about me. But that person who I'm going into their home, like, it's a guy who adopted his twin sister's children, for example, just random example, real example. But so I don't need to show off. I don't need to show everybody how clever I am with another byline. But this is the first time this family is going to be in a national publication. And it's going to be something that they talk about when, the kids are 25 years old and they're getting married. They're going to be, oh, when we were 5 years old, we were in People magazine. Look at this. And they're going to pull it out. And, it's part of their family history. It's so much more important to them than it is to me. It's a byline to me. It's their family history to them. And so once I started having that thought in the back of my mind, maybe that's when those doors opened so widely. It's just a theory. I don't know.
No, absolutely. And it's something that you talked about with Paul Giroux, that, when you're out there as a photojournalist, that it's not about you, it's about them. It's about the subject that's in front of the camera. Giroux mentioned that. And also Todd Bigelow, when he's going down and doing these shoots over and over again on the border, he's coming from that same position of, it's not about him and him getting another byline, that he really wants to tell these people's story, and being really, it's a responsibility. I mean, you mentioned it before in previous podcasts. We talked even just about not even like a moral issue like immigration or something that's, really important, but even just in a football game, if you have that press pass, you have that credential, you have a responsibility for the people that you're shooting and for the people that are going to see the pictures, to do your best and do your due diligence. And I think if you have that right, if people can see that that's what's motivating you, then they're more likely to let you in, that it's coming from a more authentic place than, for instance, like you mentioned when you're talking with Giroux about Avedon, that, every picture he made is a self-portrait. It's all about him.
Well, that's the thing. At the end of the day, this photography thing, the reason it's so exhausting, photojournalism, is because of the responsibility. And there's a huge amount of responsibility when people are trusting you to tell their stories. And that's why it's exhausting. That's why it takes so much out of you as a person. And that's why, people act weird. Photojournalists act weird. It's when they take this shit seriously, and they embrace that responsibility that they're given. And whether it's a football game or something really serious, you have that responsibility to your viewer, to the subject, and you can never phone that in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that shows, getting back to this idea of the art of hanging out and getting in the room. I think that shows people can tell what your intentions are, you know. Um, I've seen it when I do street photography, and I've read a lot about street photography. People say that, if you're running around on the street and you look pissed off, and and you're trying to sneak pictures of people and stuff like that, they're gonna automatically assume that you're coming at it from, you're trying to make fun of them or you're trying to exploit them in some way, and they're not gonna approve of it. But if you're always smiling, if you look like you're having a good time, if you look like you're in it for the right reason, then they're, most of the time they let you take their picture. They don't say anything.
Yeah, I don't. there's always this debate about people being nervous and stuff with street photography and the morals behind it and all that kind of stuff. And I've written a lot about it. I've talked about it a lot. At the end of the day, it's if you're out there, I don't think you have to have a smile on your face. I'm not a big smiler, but they see that there's an intention uh, behind what I'm doing. I have a reason for what I'm doing. And so I don't, at first, when I go out the first, in the morning and you're shooting pictures in the street, I might feel a little like, just like not uncomfortable, just like rusty or like not in the mood yet. But as soon as you start making pictures and you get into the zone, it's like, I mean, it's like manna from heaven.
Nothing
Everything.
phases you.
It's just you're there 100%. That's being there 100%. And I know that's like an easy for, okay, I never want anybody to be there 100% actually, but I want you to be there at like 90%. If you're there at 100%, you could just explode. you know there's no, I mean, you've lost all perspective.
You couldn't handle my full attention.
Right. I mean, so, but be there at 90%. 90% is pretty engaged.
Absolutely. So, okay, so making your intentions known. I mean, I think that's a good kind of takeaway from your writing on the street and stuff. People see when you're on the street that you're working, so they're not going to bother you. So with Bigelow, I just want to wrap him up real quick. He's really well known for his business of photography workshops. He at the end of that podcast, he kind of goes through some of the information that you kind of get a little bit of a preview about what those are about. Um, I personally, I've dealt with this work for hire contract before. I've never signed one. I've turned down a couple of big jobs. I had a Vice, uh, that you guys mentioned. Bigelow mentioned that Vice contract was absolutely horrible. I saw that. I have a copy of it. I had another shoot with Dove Skincare, same thing. I wasn't going to own the rights. They wanted me to do all this legwork, pay me little, and so it's really out there. I mean, these work for hire contracts, I mean, they're the mainstay contracts now. Other magazines I've worked with two magazines recently. One asked me to sign it, and I ultimately ended up getting to walk away with a handshake kind of agreement. And the other one never even asked me to and paid me really, really well. So, I mean, there's all kinds of these things out there. I think it's such a cop out for people to say that they had to sign it, because you and I are two people who've managed to be able to make a living doing this and never have had to sign one, or have never have chosen to sign one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, and I don't, I don't judge anybody for the personal decisions they make with their work and everything, but when they, they make it, they're enablers at some point for these magazines to justify their work for hire agreements. And I'm not going to enable somebody to do that. And because think if I signed a work for hire agreement, the next photographer that comes through that door, my name is going to be used like a sledgehammer on them. Well, Jarecke signed this. Who do you think you are?
Totally. I mean, when I did that Snoop Dogg shoot in Billings, and then the guy is like asking me the next day to sign a work for hire agreement after the fact. First thing he did was name drop like the 5 previous photographers who all signed it and didn't give him any trouble. And I'm just like, I don't care. I'm not those 5 photographers. I'm not going to sign this. If you would have given me the contract in advance, I never would have signed it, would have never done the job. So, but you're right. I mean, hey, as Jay-Z says, you can't hate the way a player's eaten. So if you got to do it, you got to do it. But that's I think it's kind of a cop out to say that you have to do it. in order to make a living, because there's plenty of examples. Todd is a perfect example, making a perfectly fine living without having to do that. And I do think I'm not as moral. I mean, I think that you have kind of a more of a sort of like maybe of a more of a moral approach to it, of sort of like, I'm just not going to give away my copyright under any circumstances. I'm more of the perspective of, you can pay me a certain amount to give away my copyright, but I'm not going to give you my copyright for free, and I'm not going to give it to you for the chump change that you're offering. You know, you'd have to pay a serious amount of money to own the full copyright to my pictures. Um, so I think there's a pros and cons list, like Bigelow said. You know, you can kind of weigh them out and see what's best for you. But that's definitely where we stand on it.
Yeah, I mean, they always, and I think I brought this up. I don't know who I brought this up with, but they always say, well, who am I to fight a big corporation? Well, who is anybody to fight anything? I mean, what, the corporations, because they have money and power and the numbers behind them, so you just don't fight at all. Uh,
Yeah.
I would love to be working for magazines today. I would love to be out in the world, you know, but I can't work for free, and I'm not gonna just turn over the rights to my work for a day rate. I mean, I just, so there you have it.
Not even not even for the promise of multiple day rates. It's not worth it. Um, yeah, and I think that logic is so backwards that, you know, they're the bigger the company, the more they can get away with. I think it's just the opposite to me, that if the bigger the company that comes to me, you know, my bid just goes way up, you know, and any rights you want, I'm going to charge you much more than what I would charge like maybe a small mom and pop, you know, company, or a smaller magazine, or a smaller newspaper. I would be willing to work for less. But when you come to a huge, you know, big corporation, stuff like that, no, they're getting paid. I got to get paid too. That's my approach, at least.
Well, look at it this way, you know, photographers, photojournalists, they they might not admit this, but they get into the business because they actually think their work is going to change the world. And then these same photographers that want to shoot for the New York Times, who they they think their work somehow is going to change the world because of an image they make. They're going to make somebody's life better. They don't have the gumption to like try to change the New York Times, but yet they're going to try to change the world. That means you're going to
Yeah.
fail at both.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah. If you can't make the right decisions with the choices that you have right in front of you, how do you think you're going to get other people to change theirs and make the right decisions? Yeah, that's a very good point. You want to move on? Let's move on to Paul Giroux.
Sure.
And I think that there's a lot of overlap between Paul Giroux and Todd Bigelow's podcasts. Um, to get right into that overlaps is that they've both, to this day, are paying the bills with photography, and doing it maybe in slightly different ways. But what are your thoughts on shooting weddings, on just how to pay the bills today as a photographer? Like, how, if you want to be a full-time photographer, the magazine route, the editorial route doesn't seem like you're going to be able to put food on the table taking that route. You might after some long time period of working your way up, but what do you think about shooting weddings, or shooting portraits, or doing these other type of photography jobs?
I don't, you know, I don't have a problem with anybody shooting anything. Um, Eddie Adams, okay, Eddie Adams. Nobody. Rick mentioned Eddie Adams. When I first met Eddie Adams, he burned, you know, I don't know. He was this. He was the he was the chief photographer for Penthouse magazine. That's what he was doing then. He had no other. He was doing Parade. He was doing the covers of Parade, and he was the chief photographer for Penthouse magazine. Neither one of those are big like journalistic outlets. So he's survived. He made the most famous, probably one of the top most famous pictures in history, top 5. And he was working wherever he had to work. We all work wherever we have to work. I have no problem shooting weddings or portraits or anything like that. I'm happy to. My biggest problem personally is if I spend the time marketing myself to shoot portraits and weddings, then I'm like, that's my full-time job now, trying to get those jobs. And I don't know that if personally that serves me the best. If I have a wedding that drops in my lap, yeah, I'm there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that answers my question. I'm just thinking like, um, alternative career paths in photography, that there's not just the PFJ, there's not just the magazine approach. That if you look at someone like Paul Giroux, I mean, he evolved and shifted in what a lot of people would think, when you first kind of think about photography, is kind of a backwards way, that you think you'd sort of cut your teeth shooting weddings and then work your way up to shooting magazines. He went the opposite way. He was shooting for and for magazines and things, and now he's primarily shooting weddings and personal projects and things like that.
I've always said, don't hate a player for how he's eaten. I actually said that a good
Before
20,
Jay-Z.
25 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jay-Z and I used to hang out a little bit. I don't know who came up with it first. Okay, let's just leave it. You make a living, you have these skills, and you find joy in that. I think Paul is as happy today shooting. If he's shooting a wedding, I know that he's loving every second of it. He loves it. There's nothing. I mean, and he's taking care of his family. He's
I mean, what do you
what's
think
better
about
than that?
that? What do you think about that as an alternative to doing commercial photography and being a photojournalist? I mean, isn't a wedding at
That's a
least
problem. That's a problem.
isn't yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. So isn't shooting, if you're a photojournalist, isn't like wedding and portrait stuff kind of a nice complement, especially financially, to being a photojournalist, as opposed to doing, you're doing the story on the cancer patients and then the next day you're shooting for Marlboro.
Yeah, I mean that's a big problem, and that's whenever I would complain about money with magazines, they'd say, Ken, why don't you just shoot some commercial jobs? And I'd reply, well, do you want the writers that are writing for your magazine, do you want them on the weekend shooting ad copy for the advertisements in the same magazine? Well,
Yeah.
no. So that's a problem. I've turned down a few jobs in my life, but I've um, turned down a cigarette job. I turned down a military job. I'm not going to be shooting, and I don't. And it's not even a political stance. It's just you don't cross that line. And I see so-called photojournalists doing it all the time. They cross that line. They'll try to do a story on whatever AIDS and act as though they're really concerned about the human condition, and then they'll shoot a cigarette ad, or they'll shoot 100 cigarette ads, and they'll bill $500,000 that year shooting cigarette ads. Well, where does their real passion lie? Who is the real photographer? Who's the real what is your real goal as a photographer? Is it to document the human condition, let other people see how other people live, walk in their shoes, or help sell cigarettes? And I think, okay, so it goes back to that other thing where we're talking about the intention behind the photography. And if those intentions are pure, the doors open up and the images show that. And the engaged viewer can really see that and benefit from that. The people that are shooting cigarette ads, they don't have that in their images. And that's why they start setting up pictures, not only just in camera, they'll hire models, they'll paint streets, and then they'll get it into Photoshop and they'll cut out people. They'll do major Photoshop edits on these images that were set up in the first place, and then it will be packaged as photojournalism. And maybe they're making $100,000 a year as a photojournalist, but they're making 7 or 8 times that as a cigarette salesman. It doesn't track for me.
But I think so. What I'm trying to get at here is that there's alternative ways there, and so it doesn't have to be cigarette ads. It can be shooting weddings. I mean, if you shoot 10 weddings a year for 10 grand each, you got 100 grand. Then you can go take those $500 day rates from those magazines and go do other projects and other things like that. So I just think where there's a will, there's a way. I think that we've talked about how the industry is, photojournalism and print industry is really bad right now. But there's other ways to fund your projects. And I think this wedding and portrait approach is one that kind of like maybe gets looked down upon a little bit, but especially for photojournalists, I think the skills transfer into weddings very well. And I think actually, I was going to mention too, that the basis, if you're a good street photographer, probably be a pretty good journalist and a pretty good wedding photographer. So I think the skills overlap enough that I think that's an approach. If you're not a people person, maybe there's a different type of photography where you could pay the bills, keep the lights on, but still be ready to take assignments when they come along as well.
Yeah, there's always a way. There's always a way. This business is not, the practice of photojournalism, photography in general, people say, oh, it's dead. It pisses me off whenever somebody says it's dead. It's not dead. It might be dead to you, but it's not dead to me. I'm not going to fucking roll over. Okay.
Yeah.
There's plenty of ways. There's plenty of options out there. And there's more than that. There's huge opportunities. And that's, if photography was dead, if there was no reason to learn how to be a photojournalist, then there'd be no reason to have a podcast that talks about how to be a photojournalist or a photographer. If I didn't believe there was a way to actually make this work, then there'd be no reason to document how it used to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With Jarecke, it's really important. We talked about already about if you can get in the room. He said, if you can get them to let you in, sometimes you'll get something better than you could have ever set up. And I just, you've mentioned that phrase, something similar to that to me so many times over the years. I just wanted to highlight it, that oftentimes reality can produce things. Almost all the time, reality will produce something for you that you would have never imagined, that, you couldn't have set up in a million years. And it'll be, 10 times more perfect. And it's real too. So you have that added bonus. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that. Go ahead.
No, that's always the case. Reality trumps your little imagination. It always does. And what you do when you come up with your preconceived ideas, you set a ceiling, you set a cap on what actually reality can give you. And that's a danger. And so if you have mastered the art of hanging out, then you will be able to be in position, be ready, and be patient enough for when that actually that magic does happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just think that's something you've said to me so many times in the past. And to hear those words come out of Jerome's mouth, it just, it was like an alarm bell going off in my head. This idea, you write about it a lot in your iTunes book, ebook that's available for purchase, I believe, on iTunes. And just that preconceived having these preconceived ideas will always be a self-limiting factor for you, so you got to be open to what might happen. um Jerome mentioned another really important phrase, knowing when you're in the presence of a photograph. He said today, if he went back and did things over again, it'd be easier, not just because of the technology, but because now he has almost like a spidey sense of knowing if there's a picture around him, that if he's in the presence of a photograph. And I just wanted to ask you first, do you have that same kind of feeling, that same kind of spidey sense for knowing when you're around a picture? To how do you get that skill? And how do you know when you have that skill?
Yeah, I mean that's a great way to put it. I've never thought of it as a spidey sense, but sometimes it's it will actually frighten you if you're in the zone, you're on the street, and I mean it's you can see, not only do you see everything that's happening around you, you can see what's going to happen 5 seconds down the road. So nothing is coming at you at that point as a total surprise. You're kind of ready for it. I mean, it's like the world has slowed down. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Everything's slowed down to the point where you're in front of the action, um, when you're in the zone. And so the idea of like being in the presence of a picture, that I think that just simply comes from experience. You know that all the elements are in place. Not only are the elements in place, but you've presented yourself into the situation. So you've already laid the groundwork so that when that image happens, it's going to happen organically in front of you, and nothing's going to stop that from happening because you've done everything right. So uh, that's one thing. I think that comes from experience. I think it comes from intention. The other thing, the time slowing down when you're in a new situation or on the street, um, I think that's like an athlete being in the zone.
Mhm. Well, even with that concept of an athlete, we talk about football all the time. We're from Nebraska, but you see that when players, you know, they say this all the time, in their first year when they get into NFL or their second year or whatever, um, things are happening so fast, the game's so much faster, and they can't play. They're not playing up to their potential. Then maybe in their third year or their second or third year, they say, the game slowed down for them, where they can actually do their amazing athleticism, but also think at the same time, whereas before it was just sort of like you're running around but you're not seeing. So like from a photography standpoint, like I definitely have that where I'll be in a situation where it's like, okay, I can see something's going to happen, but I'm so all over the place that I'm not seeing what's in front of me. I have the physical skill of being able to stand on the street corner all day long and wait for something to happen. I have the patience, I have the right exposure setting on my camera, but that actual vision of being in that moment and seeing it does require things to kind of slow down. And it is something I think you're right that I think it does come with experience, because when I first started doing street photography, my head was spinning. Now it's not as bad, but it still happens. But when I'm on a portrait set, I feel really that's where I feel like everything is slowed down and like I'm in like my third or fourth year in the NFL or something. Um, but at first, it's like you're just looking everywhere, and there's still times like when I do the big shoot, and there's all these football players I'm way overshooting, where that old fall back into those old bad habits where you're just relying on like your sheer athleticism, but you're not using your brain, or in our case, or your vision. So I do think that's really good, that you have to just keep going out and shooting. If you're a younger or newer photographer and you're like, I don't know if I'm in the presence of a photograph, I don't know, what are these guys talking about? You'll get there if you keep doing it over and over and over again. This isn't something you can learn even just in, 5 years. I mean, this takes 10, 15, 20 years. Even to this day, I mean, I think your vision is always evolving
No,
for
absolutely.
you even.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a better photographer today than when I was, getting published every week.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, but you do have that sense where you kind of know, something's coming, something's about to happen, and all the right things are there, that if just that last cherry on top comes through, then you'll have a picture.
Sure. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so let's move on from Giro. A lot of great stuff on there about video. People that are interested in video, make sure to go look that up. That podcast with Paul Giro. Um, he's a Sony rep, so he's got all kinds of great technical tidbits about Sony's. Okay, so Rick, let's get into Rick. How do you pronounce his last name? Smallman?
Smolin,
Smolin?
Rick Smolin.
Rick Smolin?
Yep.
I was really impressed with Rick. He's a great storyteller.
I don't know if we
Um,
should. I don't know if we should wrap it up here or not because of I got a conference call that I have to be a part of. Um,
oh, in 10 minutes?
yeah.
Okay. So let's leave Rick Smolin and Barbara Vallette. Let's get on this like soon though, because there's some amazing stuff in that Rick Smolin. Um, I mean, things about inflection points. One small decision can take you in a holy. I know you've got all kinds of stories about that. He's talked about being, desperate. A book project looks like it's going to fall apart and it's going to be a complete nightmare, and something comes through at the last minute and saves the day. I know we've both have so many experiences like that. So I definitely want to get into that before. And then the last thing too, I'll give you some homework for to you guys. You mentioned chromes throughout a lot, and I don't think a lot of people know what chromes are. It's not like a hubcap. It's not a rim or something like that. You're talking about Kodachrome film. It's color film, and I just want you to go into tell us a little bit about shooting with that, and how recently you posted some pictures on Instagram where you said you were shooting chromes. And so I want you to, next time, let's bring those pictures up and look at them, and you can kind of tell us like what is the defining, when someone says this looks like Kodachrome, like what does that mean, so
Sure.
maybe that can be your homework for next time. Give us some get some images ready that look like chromes.
So what's that Peter Lindbergh book you have? What's it? Is that The Women? What is that? Which one is that?
Yeah, this is the one, Peter Lindbergh. It's actually called Images of Women.
Okay.
And from you gave it a really, really high recommendation when we saw it. I don't think it's in print. I don't think you can get
I'll find a link.
copies.
I'll link to that. And I know that he did a second one, like Images of Women too, or something. I think we'll
More
link to
recent.
both of those. Yeah.
That one's more recent, more readily available. I do think too, like photographers, you gotta go get books. I found this, it was a little bit expensive. I just looked at the price tag. It says, it's $50. It's kind of a little bit of expensive, but it's in perfect condition. Um, Another book here, this Sam Abel book. I'm just looking at it for reference on the price. I got this book for $20. So, I mean, there's no excuse to not have books. I mean, you can get used books out there on Amazon and used bookstores, $20 here or there. I mean, I mean, the life of a photograph for $20 is like a steal. This book will give you an education that's worth thousands of dollars. Um, Rick Smolin mentioned these books, The Contemporary Masters of Photography.
Right.
Those are huge. I mean, one of the first books that you had me buy was the one with Marilyn Mark and Annie Leibovitz. There's an Elliot Erwitt one that I have sitting next to my bed that I look at all the time. You can get them, like he said, and that on Amazon, you can usually get them for like $5 or less used. There's no need to have a pristine version of it,
Oh, they're huge.
So
They're a great series. I actually went after that. I looked. Um, on eBay, and I found all that stuff. I mean, I have a few of those laying around, anyways.
Yeah.
But they're treasures. The books are treasures, and but what not only, well, we'll talk about books another time. It's we'll
Yeah.
but so okay. So thank you, Paul. We'll link to those two Peter Lindbergh books for this episode, and we'll talk again maybe at the end of the week.
Yeah. Whatever works for you, man.
Okay.
Great talking to you as always.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye-bye.